ITV Evening News with Trevor McDonald.
It's 6:30 on Monday evening, the headlines. John Prescott dismissed as male chauvinist by French minister. Bush declares himself president. Gore says it's not over. Should Sarah Ferguson teach her daughters to count calories? And it's official. We've just had the wettest autumn ever. Good evening. France's Environment Minister said today she deeply deplored the chauvinist attitudes of Britain's Deputy Prime Minister John Prescott. Dominique Voynet, speaking at a news conference to explain why the climate talks collapsed in The Hague this weekend, said she was reacting to Mr. Prescott's claim that the summit failed because she, Madame Voynet, was too tired to understand a potential deal with the Americans. Here's our political editor, John Sargent.
In Paris this afternoon, the French minister at war with John Prescott was in no mood to back down. She called his proposed deal on the environment shabby and accused him of being macho man.
Que John Prescott ait cru devoir utiliser les arguments du machisme ordinaire.
I thoroughly deplore that he's used basic chauvinism. A woman must be tired, a woman is afraid, and a woman doesn't automatically know what she is talking about. These are the arguments that came out of the Deputy Prime Minister's mouth. I consider them unworthy for the quality of the debate that we had through the week at The Hague, unworthy of our joint ambitions for the European Union.
After the talks to combat global warming had failed, the Deputy Prime Minister walked out. He claimed that a deal he'd tried to negotiate with the Americans had been thwarted by European governments, and yesterday he put the blame firmly on Dominique Voynet. The French minister, he said, got cold feet, felt she could not explain it, said she was exhausted and could not understand the detail, and then refused to accept it. That is how the deal fell through. In the Commons, the Tories accused Mr. Prescott of petulance, of lacking statesmanship.
And wasn't yesterday's collapse just the final collapse of the credibility of a failed Deputy Prime Minister?
Mr. Prescott admitted he had been anxious to catch his plane.
I admit to the weakness of wanting to go home on that night, and I'll leave the House to make a judgment about that. As to about being whether I'm accused of being a macho man, what?
It didn't quell the criticism.
Was he really meaning to offend the French minister by saying it was her lack of understanding of the complex issues involved? Was it really a lack of time, or was it a lack of charm?
I didn't say that the lady was tired. She constantly said it herself, that she was too tired at the time to take in all the complexities. And that's not, I don't think that's condemnable, because frankly, there were very complex negotiations.
This incident has given more ammunition to John Prescott's enemies, but his friends insist no one can accuse him of not caring about climate change.
John, this seems like a serious rift in Anglo-French relations. Did Mr. Prescott make a mistake here?
Well, there's no doubt a lot of people think that, and it's interesting that he didn't this afternoon in the Commons repeat his personal criticism of the French minister. So he's doing his best now to quell this diplomatic argument, and it's made more difficult because a very tricky European summit, which is obviously hosted by the French, is going to take place in Nice in 10 days' time. So there's no doubt that this argument, this personal argument, is being put to one side as quickly as possible. On the central issues put by John Prescott at these talks in The Hague, there's not a great deal of criticism, certainly not from within the government, and there it's being said that he was a passionate, committed member of the team trying to get an agreement, and he's fully supported on that.
But it still leaves unresolved, whatever the name-calling may say, a very, very serious issue.
It does, and from the British government's point of view, there is grave disappointment that a deal wasn't possible while President Clinton was still in the White House. There's a feeling that the next president could be George W. Bush, the Republican, and he will not be so keen on combating global warming.
John Sargent, thank you. And the long battle over the presidency of the United States is apparently edging closer to a conclusion of sorts this evening, even though the legal wrangles look set to go on and on. The Republican George W. Bush declared himself winner today, but the Democratic presidential challenger Al Gore will almost certainly not concede and will not give up the fight. From the United States, James Smates reports.
I hereby declare Governor George W. Bush the winner of Florida's 25 electoral votes.
These are the words that Republicans have been waiting almost 3 weeks to hear. George W. Bush declared the winner of Florida and with it the presidency. This is not the end of the matter, far from it. But for the Republicans, it's a huge victory. Al Gore and his teams of lawyers must now try and get this result overturned in court, and they only have 15 days to do that. As soon as the Florida result was announced, Al Gore's running mate was on national TV declaring no surrender.
The Secretary of State of Florida has decided to certify what by any reasonable standard is an incomplete and inaccurate count. Vice President Gore and I have no choice but to contest these actions.
They have been in court this morning demanding another 10,000 votes from the Miami area be counted by hand, all the time believing that if they're only allowed to keep looking, they will find the votes to overcome George Bush's 537-vote lead. Bush himself has been careful not to claim the title president-elect, but is now preparing for office.
Secretary Cheney and I are honored and humbled to have won the state of Florida, which gives us the needed electoral votes to win the election. But now that the votes are counted, it is time for the votes to count. The Vice President's lawyers have indicated he will challenge the certified election results. I respectfully ask him to reconsider.
That is an offer Al Gore is certain to decline. This week is to be dominated by lawsuits, the Democrats fighting in several courts in Florida, the Republicans taking their case to the U.S. Supreme Court in Washington. The will of the people is now subject to the will of the courts. James Bates, ITN, Washington.
James, it's becoming increasingly difficult to read this. Is it possible at all for Al Gore's legal challenges to succeed?
It is possible. He's not a favourite now to overturn the result of this election, but his chances aren't hopeless. What he's focusing on is what happened in the Miami area. That was one of the 4 counties that the Democrats wanted recounted by hand. The local officials there, Democrat officials, that has to be said, said they didn't have time to do that. Gore now wants a judge to say that they must do it, particularly recount 10,000 ballot papers that showed no preference in the presidential race, and that Gore believes have a lot of hidden votes for him there. But you know, his real trouble is Florida's election laws are designed really for local elections and possibly overturning, sheriff or local commissioner or something. He's now asking a judge to change the occupant of the White House, and I think that's quite a tall order.
And is there a deadline when this all has to be finished and tidied up?
Yes, there is an absolutely firm deadline of December the 12th, which is about 15 days away, which is when the Electoral College votes must be recorded and sent in according to the Constitution. But I expect the lawyering and the legal action to carry on right up till then.
James Mates, thank you. There's doubt tonight about a government plan to issue a health warning with new mobile phones before Christmas. The ITV Evening News has learnt that leaflets warning young people in particular about potential risks have been delayed because of a disagreement between the Department of Health and the Consumers Association. ITN's Lawrence McGuinty has more.
The hard sell for mobile phones this Christmas is already underway. In previous years, 1 in 4 mobiles were bought for teenagers. That's why the government hoped to have leaflets advising consumers about the potential health risks of mobile phones in the shops by now. But in this shop, like most others, there are no government leaflets. The Health Department is compiling advice for consumers about the potential health hazards of mobile phones. That's certain to point out that so far there's no scientific proof of any hazard at all. There are, however, doubts, especially about children and teenagers using mobiles. But whether advice for consumers will be available before the Christmas rush is doubtful. Back in May, the government accepted the report of an expert group that it should publish health advice on mobiles. But since then, a row about so-called hands-free kits has erupted. The Consumers Association says they're more dangerous. Government research suggests they cut down exposure. That row has delayed the government's advice.
I think it's a shame they haven't managed to work faster on this, but I think the important thing to get across to parents is that there are uncertainties, and the advice I would give is that they should let young people use the phones as little as possible, mainly for emergency use, and keep the calls as short as possible. That's really a simple message, I think, that could easily be got across.
That's also the kind of advice the government wanted to give parents this Christmas, because if there are health effects with mobile phones, the young are particularly at risk. The advice still stands, but you probably won't see it while you're shopping for Christmas. Lawrence McGuinty, ITN.
Representatives from the